plan when we get married. We plan when we buy a car, a house, and when we have our children. We even plan how we save and when we want to retire. Throughout life, we pre-plan for most important things. Doesn't it make sense to do the same for our funeral arrangements? It may seem unpleasant, but it's just good planning. With expert advice from Belgroves' family of professionals, they can help. Call or visit them first in San Fernando, Point Fortin, Chaguanas, Trin City, and Tobago. Or check their website, www.belgroves.com. Or call them 223-2178, 223-2178.
And the time is now 41 minutes after the 10 o'clock hour. And as that ad introduces, you hear Belgroves, you hear the conversation planning for your funeral. Let's be honest, it doesn't seem like the most exciting of conversations. But if you've been tuned in with us every Wednesday for the past 3 or 4 weeks or so, you would have known that we've been having these insightful conversations with Dr. Jennifer Rouse, who is the former Director, Division of Aging in the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and she's a gerontologist, which basically means she works and studies the statistics of the aging population and the psychosocial wellness, which is a conversation that we will be getting into this morning. So good morning, Dr. Rouse. Thank you for being with us via telephone.
And a pleasant morning to you and to our listeners and the Belgrove family.
And well, we know that our conversations were taking place in person, but in light of the recent pandemic, the COVID-19 virus spreading here in Trinidad and Tobago, we've been speaking over the phone. And the circumstances with which we are communicating sort of sets the tone for our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
And
I must say, we began from last week doing it more in a conversational manner.
Yes, we did, but there's a lot to talk about.
That.
Me too, and there is a lot of content to talk about. So we want to remind our listeners that you can feel free every Tuesday before this conversation starts to ask us your questions. I put up the post always the day right before, leading you into questions. I've been seeing you haven't been sharing your questions, so make sure that you contact us so that Dr. Rouse can address all of your issues. So today we're talking about the issue of the coronavirus with the aging population, because this was our conversation last week, and then we're getting into the psychosocial status in these elderly persons at the point in time.
Good. So I will start by saying COVID-19, formerly known as the coronavirus or otherwise known as the coronavirus, has certainly heralded a seismic shift. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that we could dress it up better than a seismic shift, which is the only language we use for earthquakes. Mm-hmm. And when an earthquake happens, you look for the aftershocks, which is where we are now. That seismic shift has happened. With that, it has also issued or ushered a cultural shift. Mm-hmm. And when we're dealing with a cultural shift, that is one of the most difficult shifts to make because it requires behavioral shifts. And when a person is socialized in particular norms and mores to do things in a particular way, and they do it almost rule of thumb, and suddenly this seismic shift happens, throws everything, call it a global disruption at every level. We have no choice but to stop. You will look at all the different all the religions of the world will always in some way or the other speak about stillness. As a Christian, I know it as be still and know that I am God. So if we don't get it that way, we will hear it in other different languages through the Hinduism and the Islam, etc. But we don't want to get waxing too philosophical on this, because when I showed you that deduction or in a reductionist form, that it's a seismic shift, we are going through now the aftershocks, all of that brings with it an uncertainty, because even the people in the meteorological field and who deal with earthquakes will always tell you, in spite of everything they could calibrate, the one thing that they can never do is tell you when it is coming, the velocity of it, the intensity of it, and where exactly it will be. They can never go there. So you always have to leave space for grace. I call it grace. Some may call it a void. But you just have to leave that space. And the whole question of uncertainty makes everyone tremble.
But Dr. Rouse, if I may interject, this has been the reality for a lot of the aging population as it is, because a lot of them already suffer from all sorts of different ailments.
Hypertension, because remember we were talking about the non-communicable chronic.
And there's that uncertainty for them as well in their everyday lives.
And that was one of the things that was flagged by the Minister of Health when he gave his last not the last one of his press conferences, when he mentioned that, because they will notice that most of them who have passed as a result of the COVID, together with some who have tested positive, most of them head in the list is hypertensive. So that in itself is just another long word for anxiety, because it means that the way your system was calibrated, it is already predominantly hypertensive, anxiety, worry-prone. And, I had cause to, when this came to me regarding how I will start the program, and bring it in gradually to that psychosocial, when you have to make behavioral and cultural shifts, you immediately have to go into another realm where we are now more sensitive, we are now more reflective, we are now more considerate. And when you hear those words and you look at how we behave, how the world behaves now, you realize immediately we are misaligned, and how far we have derailed from what the universe would prefer or has mandated us, that how we should live. And we are also always, although we are called Homo sapiens, which means wise, sapiens is wise in Latin. And we have become to a level of arrogance where we even look at the animals as dumb. And yet when the first tsunami that we heard of, that hit the Philippines on the Boxing Day, when that tsunami hit, not one animal was dead. Because they knew instinctively from fear and flight, that they were to go up to take higher ground, because something was happening at that seismic level that they knew the danger sign, but we didn't. You see? So it's a whole question of now everybody globally has to stop. And what is amazing with this, and why we know it is at this seismic level, is because it isn't a virus that hit, let us say, the United States first, and then sequentially it went to UK, and then sequentially to Europe. It is ubiquitous. It is everywhere at the same time. One fell swoop, one blow. And so it took everybody, and it continues to take everybody off their moorings. So now the question is, and that's why it is called or termed an existential crisis, because that's what it is.
And you mentioned habits just now.
Meaning we questioning our very existence now.
You spoke about habits just now, about the fact that a lot of us, we tend to fall into a specific norm on a day-to-day basis. And for a lot of the older population, everyone from 60 onward, while they may have witnessed or have been witness to different difficulties, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in different parts of the world as well, this is the first time that a lot of elderly people are going through a pandemic. If we're looking at the age range, maybe our grandparents lived through that first World War, or that first plague, or whatever the case may be, that has been within close reach to our generation. But this is the first time that there's a request for cultural and behavioral change. And do you think that this is something that our population, no matter the age, whether we're looking at the young population to our aging population, is it easy to assimilate into what's being requested?
And you remember in a previous session, I mentioned to you, this is the first time the world has had or is having 5 generations living together at the same time. 5. And we have, because the centenarians among us, which I told you number nearly 200, because they're scattered throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Many of those centenarians would be the ones who would have lived through 1918,
Yes.
which is when was the last pandemic of influenza, the flu. And it changed medicine. It changed sanitation. It changed technology. It ushered in all the industrialized world in a different way, bringing us into modernization as we know it, and continue to evolve. So until we understand the context of this, so it doesn't mean, by the way, that because the centenarians who are with us had experienced that before, that's where the wisdom comes in. And the ones who have lived through this, or the ones who are still alive, and they're not quite centenarians yet, but they would have had the experience as through their infancy.
Yes.
And their what we will call their pubescent years. See? And so we have to understand. And when I say this, when I stress it so much, I have hung in my bathroom the Serenity Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us know the Serenity Prayer in terms of saying it.
Yes.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Yes, exactly.
Now, there are persons who live that at the different levels,
Mm-hmm.
And the very obverse is true. Because just as we say, God grant me the serenity to accept, there are those who are not serene, and they cannot accept things that they cannot change. So you hear people curse the rain. Why is it that the rain had to fall now? Why is this or that? And from that, they just go on and on and on. And before you know it, they are so angry. Angry really with who? What can you do if the rain falls? That's what it's raining.
So,
Again, how did we prepare for that? Because especially in Trinidad where we have these two seasons. Good?
yes.
And then you go to the ones who must have courage to change the things that they can. And that's where we now are globally now. It is incumbent on us now to know how do we begin to change the way we do things, how we do it, to bring a sense of calm. And for many of us, you know what I did this morning? I walked through my house and looked around at the things that I have around me. And I said, when last did you play the music that you liked? Because I have my CDs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not yet into USB, and that's your millennial. And I'm like, when last you sat and played your music? Because now, you remember, the mandate is stay at home, stay safe, save lives. That's the mandate. So some have become so restless that staying home, they haven't even reached the word home yet. They mean staying in the house. Many cannot even stay in the house before they get angsty. Almost like claustrophobic.
And when we're
Almost
talking,
like I have to do something, because remember we spoke about being busy
Yes,
as
of
opposed
course.
to being active.
when we're looking at our population as well, since we're trying to narrow this down into our aging population
Yes.
specifically, on a regular day, if you had to remove the slippers of an elderly person in a spot that's different from where they would usually keep it, there's discomfort.
Thank you very kindly. The whole question of disorientation.
Yes.
And we haven't even touched on those who have Alzheimer's and mental illness, where you have to keep their environment almost static, because that's what they know. They know where the furniture is, they know where their utensils are, they know where all the things they need for their daily activities, they keep in a particular place.
And Dr.
Now,
Rouse, something I
those are
wanted
the
to
ones
ask.
that we spoke of there that live alone and may have a caregiver coming in.
Yes, something I wanted to ask before we get back into that. Those lives of those people who have Alzheimer's or they have a caretaker, a lot of their time is spent in that exact same home space. So this
right.
change might not necessarily be much different. Maybe they might not be able to go for their walk with as many people as they usually
And that
might.
is because that is we don't want to use words like regimented.
Yes.
But they have a regimen, you know,
they do.
and they might be asking the caregiver, why aren't we going for our walk? And she's trying to explain what is it, and some may understand, but then others who, and this is a main point that I have. Look at our own selves, and then by extension, look at how they might be thinking. If you chose to stay home inside your house, and maybe outside in the yard or whatever, but in your premises, we will use, for 1 week, which means that you're inside the house for a longer time than you would normally spend. Now, that was a choice you made, eh? You know, the moment some extraneous agent or person says you have to stay home, you know it will be a difference.
Yes, it
because
will.
you like to know you are in control of your space. But when somebody has to impose on you a mandate or an order, suddenly you start quarreling, but why I can't just go out in the road? Or why I can't...
Even if that's not something you regularly
it didn't generate from you.
And
you got it?
One thing that kind of brings up this question with me, seeing that I'm in the millennial population,
Right.
as you want to put it, and millennial doesn't just mean 20 and under. It doesn't
No,
work
it
that
doesn't.
way. Millennials going into
They go right
probably
up to
about
50.
so that
50,
is
50
covering
something,
a lot
yeah.
of ground, right? And the millennial population is going to become the aging population sooner than
Right.
later, and it's just how the time rolls. As we're looking at the introduction of this pandemic, just as it was introduced in 1918 with the influenza, this is an entirely new realm.
Right.
Belgroves in their ad spoke about the fact that you're planning for change, you're planning for life. And do you think that this is implementing a change that is to come within the next few years, that we evolve and that we live? By the time I become 40, by the time those who are currently 50, they become 70, that our population will change. There will be a psychological change for a lot of the people.
Yeah, and attitudinal change.
Yes.
Definitely.
So for those who are now being told not to hug, not to stand close, even
Yeah.
when it's okay to do so, do you believe that those are habits that everybody else will rush back into? Because it doesn't necessarily seem that
yeah,
way.
because we have certain innate things, innate attributes that we are born with. Man this is generic man, is a gregarious and social being. So we naturally want to be tactile. We naturally want to touch. Look at how inquisitive a child is,
Yes.
as a little toddler or even creeping. It is a natural offshoot. So that is innate. But then how we do what we do, that is then shaped and acquired as we get older. Not only just hug, but how you hug. Like how you have massage. You have two types of massage. And there's the therapeutic one, and you could have the erotic one. So all of this comes as we get older, as we grow in age. And you said an interesting thing there, you know, because when we were speaking about the whole attitudinal change, if we could see this experience as a death, because there's a school of thought that says during our lifespan, we get practice for our dying. With all the disappointments, disruptions, betrayals, and loss of others that we were close or attached to. That is those were the situations that came to let us practice letting go. Practice how we deal with aloneness. Practice how we deal with isolation. Until the Big Bang, when we all, because you remember my saying, none of us gets out of life alive. And so that as you experience more and more of these losses, hypothetically, you are getting to know that the transiency of things, that everything is temporary. And then you start to look at so many of the things you keep holding on to for a pseudo or false sense of security. So sometimes it's the children, sometimes it's the house, sometimes it's the money in the bank, sometimes it's the car. All of these things that are extraneous. And we forget that inner internal space is really the engine room from which everything generates. And so I look at this philosophically, I look at it metaphorically, and all the different ways to say, now, what has caused this pandemic at this time? Because on its own, it's not lethal. On its own, this is what all the scientists keep saying. On its own, it's not lethal. But it is how we behave. And I listened again to I always say the three-legged stool. When the Minister of Health said the Prime Minister has done his part, the Ministry of Health has done their part and continues to do their part. Now it's incumbent on the people, the actual individual now. So with the elderly, it is can you imagine now at 90, 95, where you have it has been ingrained in you. You have acculturated to all these norms that you have been accustomed doing, like ABC. And now things have to be done differently. Because once you are alive, you are in a constant state of learning. Learning does not end until we transition.
And on that note, our time has run out entirely. So I hold that thought, because I know it's something that we can be able to continue, especially with learning.
You see how it is onto the psychosocial,
Yes.
Because this is all about behavior and how we socialize and our mental capacity to deal with this shift.
And I want to hold on to that topic of learning, because there is a lot in that avenue that a lot of the younger population don't quite understand when it comes to the extent of what the aging population is capable of. And that's where we're bridging that gap between changing habits into learning how to adapt. And it is very possible, but it takes that engine, as you just mentioned. So I want us to hold on to that thought while we close off for today.
That's a good way for our segue next week. And always, for you as a millennial, you said your age last week was 26.
Yes.
And to look at our elders not as man-made, something that is way so remote outside of yourself, but just see us as repositories of that wisdom that came through having made so many mistakes, that we have the experience now of knowing what to do and what not to do. That comes only with aging.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rouse. I know there's a lot we can talk about, so we will be together again next Wednesday, and we're reminding our listeners to share their questions. Call us if you have the questions. Message us on our Facebook page, which is Heartbeat Radio for Women 104.1 FM. Send us your messages there. You can comment on the post that has a beautiful picture of Dr. Rouse, and it's called An Aging Population and COVID-19. It has the Belgroves logo on it. If you go on our Facebook page, it's a great spot for you to leave those comments and questions, and we can address them next week. So thank you so much. And you can also give them the number for Belgroves as well.
We can. Your number.
What we can do, they do know our number is 222-3104, but what they can do as well, we will put that link for the Belgroves Facebook page, and their contact information will also be there.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. We are wishing you well, and we're looking forward to next week's segment.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rouse. The time is now 3 minutes after the 11 o'clock hour, and this is hour number 2 of your Wednesday morning's edition of Matters of the Heart. Rayhana Khan here, keeping you company until 2 o'clock this afternoon, right here on Heartbeat 104.1 FM. And don't forget, tune in next week for another segment with Dr. Rouse as we discuss the aging population and all the different environmental statistics, the illness that's going on, so many different factors that are affecting that population. So stay tuned. Don't touch your dial.
We plan when we get married. We plan when we buy a car, a house, and when we have our children. We even plan how we save and when we want to retire. Throughout life, we pre-plan for most important things. Doesn't it make sense to do the same for our funeral arrangements? It may seem unpleasant, but it's just good planning. With expert advice from Belgroves' family of professionals, they can help. Call or visit them first in San Fernando, Point Fortin, Chaguanas, Trin City, and Tobago. Or check their website, www.belgroves.com. Or call them 223-2178, 223-2178.
Be inspired. Heartbeat 104.1. Radio for women and the men who love them.